Great. So this is Professor Green, and we're doing chapter 9, part 2 of 3. Let's go ahead and start the slideshow. So the evolution of the European Union, where did it all start? It's the result of, as I said, the devastation of Western Europe during the 2 world wars and desire for lasting peace, more communication, or so they thought, or so they think. Also a desire by the European nations to hold their own on the world's political and economic stage. So these small nations felt like they didn't have a voice compared to the US and the Soviet Union. The forerunner of the EU was the European Coal and Steel Community from 1951. As you can see, a lot of these fossil fuels and utilities, raw materials were really important at that time. And soon it became apparent that it wasn't just the coal and steel. And so then in 1957, they created the Treaty of Rome, and that started the European Economic Community, known as the EC for a long time. And then in 1993, they changed their name to the European Union. With the Maastricht Treaty. We'll talk about that in a slide or two. And the number of members fell to 27, and as I said, in 2020, when Britain exited the EU. The author of the textbook, if you ever see him in video, he has a British accent, right? So he's very concerned about Brexit. And so here we are, with members of the European Union here are in yellow. And then the non-members are in green. And as you can see, Turkey, my grandmother's from Serbia, trying to get into the EU. They're the applicants, but having a really hard time. Turkey because of human rights issue, Serbia because of a currency issue, Iceland, because of their multiple smaller issues. So let's talk about, what is the political structure of the EU? There are 4 major pieces. And if you are a political science major, this would probably be your favorite slide, but we're not, we're business majors, right? And so I'll go through it, but not in too much detail, because I want you to be familiar with the terms, but obviously we're not here to study politics. The first one is European Commission. This is where it proposes the EU legislation, implements it, and monitors compliance. This is headquartered in Brussels. This also heads up the anti-competitive behaviors. And this is where you'll see Mark Zuckerberg going. He was just there a couple of months ago to talk about privacy, about Facebook. Also Google, Microsoft shows up there quite often because they have these anti-competitive monopoly issues going on within the EU, Intel, etc. The European Council, though, is the ultimate controlling authority within the EU. The interesting part, though, is that the membership in the Council depends on the topic being discussed. I thought, wow, how efficient, that they really try and pull in the people who are most knowledgeable about the particular topic. Then we have the European Parliament, right, which is different from the Commission. The Parliament sits in Strasbourg in France, on the border of Switzerland. It debates legislation proposed by the Commission and forwarded to it by the Council. And that the Treaty of Lisbon actually recently increased their power in recent years, and now they have a president of the Parliament. And as I said, they're really trying to more guide the EU, I guess you can say, as opposed to the Council and the Commission. And then we have the Court of Justice. This is the Supreme Appeals Court for the EU, just like we have the Supreme Court here in the United States. And obviously, well, maybe not so obvious, but they have one judge from each country. The Single European Act is the committed European community countries that work toward establishment of a single market by 1992. And the objectives of the act were to remove all frontier controls between the EC countries, which is really exciting, as you can now drive from France to Germany without having to show a passport. Apply the principle of mutual recognition to product standards so that they didn't have different products within each of the different countries, so that larger organizations could buy just, one type of screw or one type of small product, and then have that be implemented in products throughout Europe. Institute open procurement to non-national suppliers. And so again, making it more free trade amongst the suppliers, lift barriers to competition in retail banking and insurance, because there's so many rules that come along with banking and insurance. So making it easier to bank between, for example, Germany and Switzerland, which is, very similar countries, very similar banking products. But before the EU and the EC, that it was hard to bank across the border. Remove all restrictions on foreign exchange transactions, obviously between the member countries. Unnecessary to have foreign exchange costs, and then abolish restrictions on cabotage. And so if you're in the logistics industry, you know what cabotage is, and that is the right of foreign truckers to pick up and deliver goods within another member state's borders, reducing the cost of haulage by 10 to 15% is what they said. So again, I'm somewhat familiar with logistics because I have driven many times across the Czech Republic, and they say the Czech Republic is like the border between the East and the West within Europe. And so they have really built up their infrastructure. The main highway between the East and the rest of Europe is called the D1, and they're all these big trucks. And so really important that those trucks can be as efficient when they pick up and drop off goods. And so what's the impact of that act? It helped restructure large segments of the industry via production and distribution systems. So again, this is all about bettering economies of scale and making things more efficient. That we want this faster economic growth. The good thing is that we've seen a raised GDP between 2 and 5% in its first 15 years of the European Union. There's been debate whether it's 2% or whether 5%, but there's definitely been growth. And so the idea is that we will continue to see growth. But the author, as I said, of this textbook is very much of a realist. And he says, though, that reality, however, it still falls short of the ideal. And I'd say, my professor from Thunderbird would probably agree with that. We had all these high hopes and expectations in 2000, and it is moving forward, but slowly. So, and they see that why that's happening is really because the implementation is kind of uneven due to language, cultural, and legal differences across the countries. So maybe there's been great economic growth in Greece, for example, but not necessarily growth in Germany. So the establishment of the euro, let's talk currency. In 1992, the Maastricht Treaty committed the EU members to adopt a single currency, the euro. The euro is used by 19 of the member states. As I said, not all of them quite yet, the Czech Republic being one of them. Created the Eurozone, encompassing 330 million EU citizens. So that's a lot of people. Countries that participate have agreed to give up control of their monetary policy, and Britain, Denmark, and Sweden opted out from the beginning. In 1999, all currencies were linked to the euro. So I was living in Germany at the time. And I remember when we came home, when I came back from Switzerland to Germany on January 1st, all of a sudden all the shops showed the price in euro as well as in Deutschmark, but it was all linked. And so then for 3 years, it stayed that way. And then in 2002, the shops would only accept euros. And you had to turn in your Deutschmark and exchange. So the establishment of the euro now it continues. What are the benefits of the euro? Handling one currency rather than many, right? No exchange rates, no exchange fees, etc. Easier to compare prices across Europe. So for vendors, for suppliers, etc. There's no exchange rate and not having to worry about what the value is, making things much more simple. Increased competition promotes greater efficiencies in production, as we've heard again and again in this course. The pan-European capital market should develop further, and that so that the EU should grow. And then the range of investment options open to both individuals and institutions then should increase, because now you don't have to worry about all these different currencies. And so financial products will be more streamlined. What are the costs of the euro? So membership implies a loss of control over monetary policy. And the EU, we have to say, though, is not an optimal currency area, actually, an area where similarities and underlying structure of economic activities make it feasible, right? The author is British. Well, this is a general thing, but he's speaking to the Brexit piece, make it feasible to adopt a single currency and use a single exchange rate. I should say the piece that Britain decided not to adopt the euro from the beginning as an instrument of macroeconomic policy. So and that's also what my mother says too, right? All these countries are so different, and right, does it really make sense for England or for Germany to be supporting Greece, for example? Countries may react differently to changes in the euro, right? There's differences in wage rates, taxes, tax regimes, business cycles. And so, each country can be quite different. So that's why we say that it's not an optimal currency area, unlike the United States, for example, where our culture and governments are much more similar state to state. So the euro experience, it has a volatile trading history with the US dollar. Thought that was kind of interesting, right? Because we don't really see that as much here in 2022. It's not as volatile anymore. It was 1.17, and then it fell in value, and now it's strengthened, etc. And now it's 1.112, as I said. So it's somewhat steady against the euro, in my personal experience in the last couple of years since the publication of the textbook. So enlargement of the EU. We're going to now talk about why many countries, particularly from Eastern Europe, have applied for membership. 10 countries joined in 2014, including the Czech Republic and Poland. Then in 2004, I said that correctly. Then in 2007, Bulgaria and Romania joined. Croatia joined in 2013, which is great. I've been there a few times. They're really doing fantastic in there. Everything in their country is really, kicking up a notch, because I was there when I was a teenager, or when I was 12, and it's really quite a different country these days. And it's due to the EU, right? It's because they've had to bring up their standards to make sure that they got into the EU. Turkey has applied for membership, but it's not clear if they will be accepted because of their human rights violations, as I've mentioned. So welcome to Croatia, the big celebration when they finally get in, because they can reap so many benefits. And then our last slide of the day here is talking about the British exit from the European Union. They voted to leave in 2016, but they just recently left in 2020. They were uncomfortable with their loss of national sovereignty. Immigration also became a key issue. They were having so many people come into the EU, into the UK, and just felt like they were really losing control. Britain was EU's second largest economy, as seen as a counterweight to Germany. So to lose the UK was a really big deal. Most experts predict Great Britain will see significant short and medium-term costs based on the exit, right? So that's what they keep saying, even though the politicians in the UK see otherwise. So yes, we will see in coming years what happens. Let's go ahead and stop with part 2 of chapter 9, and you can click on the next video for part 3.